We are going to record and I will. Okay, so here we are. I am going to read our story. Oh. Well, okay. So I am going to read The Stone. So I'm going to go to my classes. I'm going to show you how to find the material. Content. It's not showing up down here yet because it's still a while. Two more people have turned in their friendly letter. Okay, so here I am. Start here. It has the friendly letter in NWEA. Lesson 1 or Unit 1 is lesson learned. And I'm going to go to view as a student so you don't see the hidden stuff. Makes it a little easier for you. Okay, so here we are. Content, because I'm like 2 weeks out from our story. Okay, so lesson learned. I'm going to go to read. And we're going to read The Stone. Okay. So here it is. Here's the link. And I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. We read part of it in class, or at least I hope we got to it. And I'm going to make this full screen so it shows up better. All righty. The Stone by Lloyd Alexander. There was a cottager named Mybon, and one day he was driving down the road in his horse and cart when he saw an old man hobbling along. So frail and feeble, he doubted the poor soul could go many more steps. Though Mybon offered to take him in the cart, the old man refused. And Mybon went on his way home, shaking his head over such a pitiful sight, and said to his wife, Madrona, Ah, what a sorry thing it is to have your bones creaking and cracking, and dim eyes and dull wits. And when I think this might come to me too, a fine, strong-armed, sturdy-legged fellow like me, one day to go tottering and have his teeth rattling in his head and live on porridge like a baby, there's no fate worse than that in all the world. So he's thinking about the old man that was on the side of the road. There is, answered Madrona, that's his wife, and that would be to have neither teeth nor porridge. Get on with you, Mybon, and stop borrowing trouble. Hoe your field, and you'll have no crops and harvest, and no food for you or me and the little ones. Sighing and grumbling, Mybon did it as his wife bade him. Although the day was fair and cloudless, he took no pleasure in it. His axe blade was notched and the wooden handle splintery. His saw had lost its edge, and his hoe, once shining new, had begun to rust. A hoe is the thing that you use to pull out weeds. It has a stick and it's got a little thing on the bottom that pulls out weeds. None of his tools, it seemed to him, cut or chopped or delved, vocabulary and context, as well as they had once done. They're as worn out as that old codger that I saw on the road, Mybon said to himself. He squinted up at the sky. Even the sun isn't as bright as it used to be, and it doesn't warm me half as well. This is a little bit of foreshadowing here. Well, it's gone threadbare as my cloak. It's gone threadbare as my cloak or coat. And there's no wonder, for it has been there longer than I can remember. Come to think of it, the moon's been looking a little wilted around the edges too. As for me, went on Mybon in dismay, I'm in even a worse state. My appetite is faded, especially after meals. Mornings when I wake, I can hardly keep myself from yawning. And at night, when I go to bed, my eyes are so heavy that I can't even hold them open. It's that way. If things are that way now, the older I grow, the worse it will be. Oh, no. In the midst of his complaining, Mybon glimpsed or saw something bouncing and tossing back and forth beside a fallen tree in the corner of the field. Wondering if it was one of his piglets, he squeezed out of that had squeezed out of the sty and gone rooting for acorns. My Bon hurried across the turf, and then he dropped his axe and gaped in astonishment. Now, this is another paragraph you can be thinking about vocab and context. What do some of these words mean? What is a sty? What does it mean when I'm rooting or gaped? Of course, that's down there, so that's sort of cheating. There, struggling to free his leg, which had been caught under a log, lay the short, thick-set figure, a dwarf with red hair bristling in all directions beneath his round, close-fitting leather cap. At the sight of my Bon, the dwarf squeezed shut his bright red eyes and began holding his breath. After a moment, the dwarf's face went redder than his hair, and his cheeks puffed out and soon turned purple. Then he opened one eye and blinked rapidly at my Bon, who was staring at him, speechless. What? Snapped the dwarf. You can still see me? I can, replied my Bon, more than ever puzzled. And I can see very well that you got yourself tight as a wedge under that log. And all your kicking only makes it worse. At this, the dwarf blew out his breath and shook his fists. I can't do it, he shouted. No matter how I try, I can't make myself invisible. Everyone in my family can disappear. Poof, gone, vanished, but not me. Not Dolly, believe me. If I could have it done, you never would have found me in such a plight. Worse luck. Well, come on. Don't stand there googling like an idiot. Help me get loose. At this sharp command, my Bon began tugging and heaving at the log, and then he stopped and wrinkled his brow and scratched his head, saying, Well now, just a moment, friend. The way you look and all your talk about turning yourself invisible, I'm thinking you might be one of the fair folk. Oh, clever, Dolly retorted. Oh, brilliant, great clodhopper, giant beanpole. Of course I am. What else? Enough gabbling. Get a move on. My leg is going to sleep. If a man does the fair folk a good turn, cried Malbon, his excitement growing, it's told that they must do one for him. I knew sooner or later you'd come to that, grumbled the dwarf. That is the way it is with you ham-handed, heavy-footed oafs. Time was, you humans got along well with us, but nowadays you no sooner see a fair folk than it's grab, 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 gobble, 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 grant my wish, give me this, give me that, as if we had nothing better to do. Yeah, I'll give you a favor, Dolly went on. That is the rule. I'm obliged to. Now, get on with it. Hearing this, Malbon pulled and pried and chopped away at the log as fast as he could and soon freed the dwarf. Dolly heaved a sigh of relief and rubbed his shin and cocked a red eye at Malbon, saying, All right, now you've done your work. You have your reward. What do you want? Gold, I suppose. That is the usual. Jewels, fine clothes. Take my advice. Go for something practical. A hazelwood twig to help you find water if your well ever goes dry. We'll have to talk about that in class. Maybe you have a question about what that means. An axe that never needs sharpening. A cook pot always brimming with food. None of those? Cried Malbon. He went down to the dwarf and whispered eagerly, But I have heard tell that you fair folk have magic stones that can keep a man young forever. That is what I want. I claim one for my reward. Dolly snorted. I might have known you'd pick something like that. As to be expected, you humans have it all muddled. There's nothing that can make a man young again. That's even beyond the best of our skills. Those stones you're babbling about, well, yes, there are such things, but greatly overrated. All they'll do is keep you from growing any older. Just as good, my Bon exclaimed. I want no more than that. Dolly hesitated and then frowned. Between the two of us, take a cook pot. Better all around. Those stone, we'd sooner not give them away. That there is a difficulty because you'd rather keep them for yourselves, Malbon broke in. No, no, you shan't cheat me of my due. Don't put me off with excuses. I told you what I want, and that's what I'll have. Come on, hand it over, and not another word. Dolly shrugged and opened up the leather pouch that hung from his belt. He spilled a number of brightly colored pebbles into his palm, picked out one of the larger ones and handed it to Mabon. The dwarf jumped in and took to his heels, raced across the field, and disappeared into a thicket. Laughing and crowing over his good fortune and his cleverness, Mabon hurried back to the cottage where he had told his wife what had happened and showed her the stone he had claimed from the fair folk. As I am now, so I will always be, Mabon declared, flexing his arms and thumping his chest. A fine figure of a man. Oh no, no gray beard and wrinkled brow for me. Instead of sharing her husband's jubilation, Madrona flung up her hands and burst out, Mabon, you're a greater fool than I ever supposed, and you're selfish into the bargain. You've turned down treasures. You didn't even ask that dwarf for so much as new jackets for the children, nor a new apron for me. You could have had the roof mended or the walls plastered. No, a stone is what you ask for. A bit of rock, no better than you'll dig up in the cow pasture. Crestfallen and sheepish, Mabon began thinking his wife was right, and the dwarf had indeed given him no more than a common field stone. Well, it's true, he stammered. I feel no different than I did this morning, no better, no worse, but every way the same. That red-headed little wretch, he'll rue the day that if I ever find him. So saying, Mabon threw the stone into the fireplace. That night he grumbled his way to bed, dreaming revenge on the dishonest dwarf. The next morning, after a restless night, he yawned and rubbed his eyes and scratched his chin, and then he sat bolt upright in bed, patting his cheeks in amazement. My beard, he cried, tumbling out and hurrying to tell his wife, it hasn't grown, not by a hair. Can it be the dwarf didn't cheat me after all? Oh, don't talk to me about beards, declared his wife, as Mabon went to the fireplace, picked out the stone, and clutched it safely in both hands. There's the trouble in the chicken roost. Those eggs would have hatched by now, but then the hen is still brooding on her nest. Let the children worry about that, answered Mabon. Wife, don't you see what a grand thing is happening to me? I am not a minute older than I was yesterday. Bless that generous-hearted dwarf. Let me lay hands on him and I will bless him, retorted Madrona. That is all well and good for you, but what of me? You'll stay as you are and I'll turn old and gray and worn and wrinkled and go doddering into my grave. And what of our little ones? They'll grow up and have children of their own and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and you younger than any of them. What a foolish sight you'll be. But Mabon, gleeful over his good luck, paid his wife no heed and only tucked the stone deeper into his pocket. The next day, however, the eggs had still not hatched. And the cow, Madrona cried, she's long past due to calve and no sign of a young one ready to be born. Don't bother me with cows and chickens, replied Mabon. They'll all come right in time. As for time, I have got all the time in the world. The chicken's eggs are not hatching. The cow is not having her baby. Interesting. Having no appetite for breakfast, Mabon went out into his field. All of the seeds had been sown there. However, he was surprised to see that not one had sprouted. The field, which by now should have been covered with green shoots, lay bare and empty. More foreshadowing, perhaps? Hey, things do seem a little bit late these days, Mabon said to himself. Well, no hurry. It's that much less for me to do. The wheat isn't growing, but neither are the weeds. Some days went by, and still the eggs had not hatched, and the cow had not calved, and the wheat had not sprouted. And now my Bon saw that the apple tree showed no sign of even the smallest, greenest fruit. My Bon, it's the fault of that stone, wailed his wife. Get rid of that thing. Nonsense, replied my Bon. The season is slow, that's all. Nevertheless, his wife kept at him and kept at him so much that my Bon at last, and very reluctantly, threw the stone out of the cottage window. Not too far, though, for he had it in the back of his mind to go out later and find it again. The next morning he had no need to go looking for it, for there was the stone sitting on the window ledge. You see, said my Bon to his wife, here it is, back again. So it's a gift meant for me to keep. My Bon, cried his wife, will you get rid of it? We've had nothing but trouble since you brought it to the house. Now the baby is fretting and fuming, teething, poor little thing, and not a tooth has been seen. My Bon, that stone is bad luck, and I want no part of it. Protesting that it was none of his doing, for that the stone had come back, my Bon carried it to the vegetable patch and dug a hole. Not very deep, though, and he put the stone into it. The next day, there was a stone above ground, winking and glittering. My Bon, cried his wife, once and for all, if you care for your family, get rid of that cursed thing. Seeing no other way to keep peace in the household, my Bon regretfully and unwillingly took the stone and threw it down the well, where it splashed into the water and sank from sight. That night, while he was trying vainly to sleep, there came such a rattling and clattering that my Bon clapped his hands over his ears, jumped out of bed, and went stumbling into the yard. At the well, the bucket was jiggling back and forth, up and down, in the end of the rope, and in the bottom of the bucket was, you guessed it, the stone. Now my Bon began to truly be distressed. Not only the toothless baby, the calfless cow, the fruitless tree, and the hen sitting desperately on her eggs, but for himself as well. Nothing is moving along as it should, he groaned. I can't even tell one day from another. Nothing changes. There's nothing to look forward to, nothing to show for my work. Why sow the seeds if they don't sprout? Why plant if there's never a harvest? Why eat if you never get hungry? Why go to bed at night or get up in the morning or do anything at all? And the way it looks, so it will stay forever and ever. I have shriveled up from boredom, if nothing else. My Bon pleaded his wife for all of the sakes, destroy that dreadful thing. My Bon tried now to pound the stone to dust with his heaviest mallet, but he could not so much as knock a chip from it. And he put it against the grindstone without so much as scratching it. He set it on his anvil. I wonder what an anvil is. And belabored it with a hammer and tongs, all to no avail. At last, he decided to bury the stone again, this time deeper than before. Picking up his shovel, he hurried to the field. But he suddenly halted and the shovel dropped from his hands. There, sitting cross-legged on a stump, was the dwarf. You, shouted Malbon, shaking his fist. Cheat, villain, trickster. I did you a good turn, and now you have, and see how you have repaid it? The dwarf blinked at the furious Malbon. You mortals are an ungrateful crew. I gave you what you wanted. You should have warned me, burst out Malbon. I did, dully snapped back. You wouldn't listen. No, you yapped and yammered and bound to have your way. I told you we didn't like to give away those stones. And when you mortals get hold of one, you stay just as you are, but so does everything around you. Before you know it, you are mired in time like a rock in the mud. You take my advice, get rid of that stone as fast as you can. What do you think I've been trying to do? Blurted Malbon. I've buried it, thrown it down the well, pounded it with a hammer. It keeps coming back to me. That is because you really didn't want to give it up, the Dolie said. In the back of your mind and at the bottom of your heart, you didn't want to change along with the rest of the world. So as long as you feel that way, that stone is yours. No, no, cried my Bon. I want no more of it. Whatever may happen, let it happen. That is better than nothing happening at all. I've had my share of being young. I'll take my share of being old. And when I come to the end of my days, at least I can say I've lived each one of them. If you mean that, answered Dolly, toss the stone into the ground right at the base of the stump, and then go home and be about your business. My Bon flung down the stone and spun around and set off as fast as he could. When he dared at last to glance back over his shoulder, fearful the stone might be bouncing along at his heels, he saw no sign of it, nor the red-headed dwarf. My Bon gave a joyful cry, for at that same instant, the fallow in the field was covered with green blades of wheat. The branches in the apple tree bent to the ground, so laden they were with fruit. He ran to the cottage and threw his arms around his wife and children and told them the good news. And then the hen hatched her chicks, the cow bore her calf, and my Bon laughed with glee when he saw the first tooth in his baby's mouth. Never again did my Bon meet any of the fair folk, and he was glad of it. He and his wife and his children and grandchildren lived many years, and my Bon was as proud of his white hair and long beard as he had been of his sturdy arms and legs. Stones are all right in their way, said my Bon, but the trouble with them is they don't grow. So think about the title of our unit, Lessons Learned, and what we talked about in class. Did my Bon learn a lesson here? What do you think about it? We'll talk about it in class. And that is it. And bye.